Welcome to the Elements of Success podcast with Johnny Dawson. This is the show that will inspire you to uncover your formula for success so you take charge of your story, overcome life's obstacles, and find fulfillment in all branches of life. With Johnny as your guide, you will break down the science of success and experiment with how you can combine key elements to uncover discipline you need to accelerate your journey towards prosperity. Now, on to today's episode.
Welcome to the Elements of Success podcast, where we explore specific traits that break down the barriers between you and success. We do this by bringing on guests so that they can share their stories of success. Today, I'm joined with my co-host, Eric Johnson, and returning guest, the one and only, my wife, significant other, Borah Dawson. Woo-hoo. Thanks for being on the show again.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So last episode, we really dove into perseverance. We talked about how being a single mom and a business owner and really how that mindset of perseverance, of living through all those life's obstacles, helped build confidence in going through what I would say so far has been the most stressful 6 to 9 weeks of our marriage of having a major brain operation.
I would agree with that statement very much.
Good. Well, I'm glad, and I didn't give you $20 to agree, so that's good news. However, we are about 1.5 miles from one of the best malls in the city, so I'm sure I'm going to have to do something after this podcast today. But anyway, I wanted to really dive into a word as part of the element of success that I think everyone should have kind of in their quiver of arrows, if you would, a tool in their toolbox. And Borah and I talked about when we were discussing her situation, we came up with perseverance. And she said, well, I like perseverance, but really you can't have perseverance if you don't have resilience, right? And that's what we really wanted to dive into today on today's episode is resilience. And really, it's a short definition, and it's basically the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And there has been no greater time that I've ever imagined of someone having a major brain operation and being told that you may not walk for the next 6 months, 10 months, and then 4 to 5 weeks later make progress at such a quick rate that it kind of defined the logic of what they had originally thought. The only way to do that is through resilience. And really, as I go back and look at the recap of perseverance, which is the definition of that is to continue a course of action even in the face of difficulties with little or no prospect of success. You take resilience, the capacity of recovering quickly from difficulties. I think that you have to have both of those. And the reason why is any time in life that maybe you've gone through a difficult situation, maybe you've had a surgery, maybe you've had a business deal gone bad, maybe you've lost your job. I know a lot of people are facing that right now. Mm-hmm. The longer you dwell on that situation, the longer you live inside of that difficulty, the harder that uphill battle is to get over that hump and get to the next hurdle. Borah, would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
When you were thinking about your surgery and this term resilience, would you have ever imagined that you would have recovered as quickly as you did?
No, I still struggle to believe it. It was tough.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things that she's really struggled with is driving, for instance, right? Because her balance nerve was cut into, and it really puts her in a dizzy phase if she turns her head too fast. So checking your blind spots and looking at your mirrors, wow. She can get really dizzy doing that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but is today the first day that you've driven on the highway?
Today was the first day I drove on the highway to get here.
How was that experience?
It was difficult. I drove really slow in the slow lane, but I made it safely. At no point did I feel unsafe, but it was a very interesting experience. Simply put, my rehab specialist told me today, because I no longer possess that vestibular nerve on the right side, my body uses my vision for feedback. And so when all of those things are moving, I don't have that constant anymore. And so in rehab right now, we're working on not using my vision to balance myself. So it was very surreal to be on the freeway with cars going 70 miles per hour. So I did it safely, and I'm glad I can check that off the list.
Wow. Absolutely. Now, do you think that was one of the fears that you've had with your progress? I already know the answer is yes, because we've talked about this a lot. But the point I want to make with just that one example with resilience is I believe the only way that you can recover quickly from doing something is to get over the fear factor and just do it, right?
Yeah, 100%.
When we are done with this podcast, I'm going to assume that you feel a lot more comfortable going home back on the highway.
I see what you're doing here, but I think it's going to take some more practice. It's not something that I think I want to do every day, but like most of the rehabs that I've done, it's repeating those uncomfortable situations. So, you've seen me have to walk and turn my head certain degrees, and it creates this bobblehead effect almost. And so the only way to get over that is by repeating the things that make me feel uncomfortable, and eventually my body will compensate. But I do need to keep doing it. I might opt for you to drive home, but we'll keep practicing.
That's good. Well, and the reason why I'm bringing this up and kind of putting you out there a little bit is again, I think a lot of people have fears that paralyze them. And I've spoken to this several times about in the Marine Corps, that your fear can paralyze you from doing something that you know in your heart you should be doing and that you're capable of. But the fear alone prevents you from excelling at that. And it could be a recovery of a major operation like you had. It could honestly be stepping out of your comfort zone and going into the business world, or leaving a job that you really don't like, but you're better at something else, and you know that you could spend more valuable time there, but you're afraid of that change. And really, as humans, we all fear change. It's the number one fear that we all have is really change. And no matter the change that you have in life, you just got to go through that fear to get there. In fact, I've spoken to a lot of different places about change, and one of the greatest analogies, again, about getting over the fear of change is I've always looked at the railroad system and our mode of transportation and how it's changed over time. Interesting, right? How did we get from wagons to hyper trains that we're trying to get a hyperloop to go from Columbus to Chicago to Pittsburgh in like 30 minutes? I mean, that is a significant change in the mode of transportation. And really what it stems from is the distance of a railroad track from track to track is the same exact distance as a Roman Empire war chariot. And so that may sound confusing to most. So how did we get that distance of the railroad track? Well, really, it stems from the Roman Empire. So when they built their war chariots, it was 4.5 feet wide, I believe is the correct distance, but 4.5 feet wide. And that distance, the ruts that were built into the road, was the same distance that the European settlers used to build their wagons. And then when trains were built and trams, they used all the same tools to build their tramway in Europe, and that was the exact same distance. So when European settlers came to the United States, they brought all the same tools with them. So it was the same distance going all the way back to the Roman Empire. And what I tell people all the time is no matter what the change is or how hard it may be, do something consistently like that same measure of distance, and over time the mode of transportation changed. And where I'm going with that is Borah really had a struggle going to rehab. In fact, she didn't want to go. Some days, you didn't want to go, or I would walk in the bedroom and she's kind of out of it and medicated. And I would tell her, it's time for rehab. We need to do some rehab and things like that. But at the end of the day, it was really tough and difficult to get through that. So I want to know, when you walked into rehab first time, because I have it on video, And and she said, I want you to walk with this walker. And I remember you looked at her like, are you crazy? What were some of your initial thoughts on that first day in rehab?
Whew. It was defeating a little bit because at that point, I was not walking on my own. You were pretty much helping me everywhere I went around the house. We didn't have the walker yet. And she asked me to stand up off the table and hold myself up at the walker. And I shook uncontrollably. And that first day, we didn't even finish a whole session. She asked me to walk with the walker to the doorway, and I quit. Do you remember I quit? And I left feeling so defeated because I felt like if I would have tried a little bit harder, I probably could have completed the task, but I didn't believe in myself at that moment. I'm like, I can't do this. I felt so weak, and then I just remember her asking me to walk, and as soon as I got to the doorway, I was like, I'm ready to go. It was defeating. It was really tough.
So for those of those listening, I counted the steps that day, and it was 3 steps.
Wow.
You're talking about someone that was asked to walk and could literally only take 3 steps and said, I quit. I just want to go home. And you were crying. When we went out to the car, you were crying because you felt so defeated. That I think at that moment, it was the realization of this is not going to be easy, right?
Yeah. I think that's when and correct me if I'm wrong, you realized how hard recovery was going to be.
Yeah. I think and also in that moment, we made a decision together that you're not going to feel that way when you go back to the hospital and when you walk back into that rehab clinic. So walk us through kind of that thought process of when you made that decision of, I've got to take this head on, and this change is going to be difficult, but I've got to have some resilience to get through this. Walk us through kind of a day in the life from waking up to your routine of how you are now 6, 7, 8 weeks later able to walk as well as you were before surgery. Can't walk backwards yet. We're getting that done. We're getting there. But you got walking forwards down. And I want to know what you think was a large part of that progress.
Wow. There's a lot of components to that, but I think in that moment when, and I don't know if you remember this is really that turning point in that first rehab session. She looked at you and looked at me and said, maybe it's too soon for rehab. Maybe you should wait a couple of weeks and come back. And I think the moment of that opportunity to get better sooner being taken away from me was even more devastating than not being able to take the steps. And I knew at that point, if I waited a couple more weeks to start rehab, I would be a couple weeks behind. And that sinking feeling where she said that still is with me. So the days that I go to rehab and I feel like she's pushing me too hard, or I don't feel like I can do it, I remember what it feels like for her to take that away from me and be like, maybe you're not ready. And I didn't like that feeling. I wanted to be in control of my recovery. And so, waking up in the morning and being tired, there's lots of different things that are happening in recovery. My brain is healing. I have an incision, my nerve is gone and I'm trying to compensate. I'm also medicated on lots of different things. And so there are lots of days I didn't want to get out of bed, but knowing that the only way I was going to get better and stop missing out on playing outside with the boys or going to their games and their practices was forcing myself even when I didn't feel like it. The first time you put me on the Peloton bike, I was scared that I was going to fall off of it. But it's that sinking feeling of not recovering fully that really pushed me to do it. There was always a decision. You can either make an excuse today or you can show up and push yourself and then listen to your body when it's time to stop. And that's really what I thought of every day when I had to do the rehab. I really didn't feel up to it but I knew I had to push myself to a certain level if I wanted to recover. You know, I think for you and I especially, having those parameters of you're not going to walk unassisted until December, till Christmas, was pretty eye-opening. And that ultimately became our goal. Every time we've been at rehab until I started walking unassisted was really, I have to beat this. Like, I'm going to walk sooner than Christmas. And so really having that goal in mind and realizing an excuse to not do it is not going to get me there, right? Like, knowing I have to push myself was really what drove me, and having that, remembering that sinking feeling of having someone take it away from you.
Just sitting here listening to this, the first podcast, the first portion of this, the first part of this podcast, what the word was perseverance, right? And now this episode, you're talking about resilience, and I can't help but have a third word, and that's conquering, right? Mm-hmm. Borah, you conquered this. And the reason I say that is, I don't know what other people's fears are. I don't necessarily have a fear of heights, but I do have a fear of falling from heights, right? Whatever you want to call that. But if you've ever climbed a very tall ladder or done a ropes course where you're going and you're having to climb a pole, even though you may have a harness on, even though there are safety precautions in there, your body does things naturally. Right. Your muscles do things naturally because of fear. So, Borah, you spoke about trembling. That comes on because of fear, not just because, your situation, it wasn't necessarily fear, it was your body. So what I'm hearing is that you not only had to overcome the fear, which can put your body into a place. I remember climbing that pole in the ropes course, and my muscles beginning to seize up the higher I got, right? Because my forearms, all of a sudden, they're like really sore and tight. I'm like, what are you doing? Let go, climb higher. So you had to battle through not only the fear making your body do something different, but the surgery was making your body do something different. So, man, I can't imagine all those things happening all at the same time. You're talking about the driving thing, having to relearn not the driving part, but the balancing. That's amazing to me that you're having to compensate and teach your body to do something different. And you've done it in such a short amount of time. It just blows my mind to be able to overcome that. So, yeah, I would say perseverance, resilience, those are great. But in my mind, you're a conqueror for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I know going on this theme of resilience and being able to bounce back quickly, et cetera, it's easy to get caught in the trap of, and oftentimes I think as Christians, we ultimately do this at some point in our life, but it's easy to get caught in the trap of blaming God or blaming someone else for your problems, right? I know a lot of people may not know this, but when Borah and I first got together, I was an atheist, I would say, right? I experienced things in Iraq that my belief was always, if there is a God or a higher power, why would he allow this to happen to 19-year-old men who are trying to create some good in a country that is really, really bad? Mm-hmm. And the kids over there have a very soft place in my heart, just watching them and developing relationships with a few of them and things like that. It's very easy to see how difficulties that we each face in life, it's easy to blame something else for that difficulty. And one of the things that Borah told me when we first started dating is really, this isn't going to work out unless you start coming to church with me. I'm sorry, but that's who I am. And that's kind of, she almost gave me an ultimatum at that point. Yeah, it was a difficult decision to make, and I'll never forget walking out of church, of that first service that I went with her at, and just feeling like almost like my heart had that was stone had built a block around it from war, kind of crumble and break down, and feel this sense of happiness, joy, and peace that I haven't felt in a very, very, very long time. And I want to lead into, because I'm interested to hear her response on this, but someone that gets diagnosed with a terminal disease or even a brain tumor like what you had, or yesterday the highway was shut down because there was a major car accident. It's easy to accuse or to put that circumstance and blame on something or someone else. And we could have done that. We could have lost faith. We could have kind of pivoted and said, you know what, we're not going to church because God, why would you do this to us? Why would you give my wife a brain tumor, etc. So when you have someone that is accusing God or anything, accusing someone else, let's say it's not God, let's just say they're blaming someone else for their own difficulties. Knowing the situation that you've just gone through, how did you kind of combat that? And then what would you tell them as advice?
That's really a good question. And I think there's two things. One, we live in a really broken world. It started with Adam and Eve, right? Mm-hmm. Broken. So I don't believe God allowed this tumor or gave me this tumor. I think that we live in a broken world and this is part of it. But the one thing that I do believe at the core of who I am is that God is good. And he's not going to let this trial go without using it for his good. And I think in any situation, you know, if you have faith in the Lord, he is going to reveal to you what that good is, right? So we're kind of still in the thick of it. So, you know, I've yet to see what that good is, but I believe that he will use this for his good. I don't want to say that there's a reason, but I feel like even though this happened to me and our family, there is good that has come out of it. I'm healthy. You know, my surgery was successful. I'm walking. And you and I chose to share very raw moments in this recovery. Mm-hmm. And so far, the good that I see is that my message is reaching people all over the world, truly all over the world, through TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. I get messages at least once a day of someone who's newly diagnosed, has a family member who's diagnosed. They ask me questions. They're looking for hope, you know. So I feel like in this moment, I've chose to focus on that good that God has done for us, is share this story, give hope to others, and know that this circumstance doesn't define us. It's definitely a chapter in our book, and we'll remember it. We spent our 8th wedding anniversary in the emergency room over this, and it's a chapter in this book, but my book's not written. It's not over. And focusing on the fact that he will reveal what good this is going to bring gives me a sense of peace. And so it's easy as humans to want to blame someone for it, right? Sometimes you just have to resolve the fact that things happen, bad things happen to good people, and try to find the good in it, whatever that is.
Yeah, I personally think that's the key point in any difficulties that we all face, right? You and I have always talked, we're either going into a storm, through a storm, or coming out of a storm. And no matter where you are on that life cycle, know that it's the difficulty that you're facing, and it's that obstacle that can really set the tone of you growing through that situation. Adversity is what creates growth inside of us. I was telling Borah a few weeks ago, I asked her, I said, do you know how the jacuzzi came to be? And I read this article about jacuzzis, and really the jacuzzi is an Italian family name. That's how it was named after a family in Italy. And what had happened was a gentleman had a son who had some sort of disease where his muscles ached all the time. He was in a lot of pain. So they figured out, let's put a big tub of water and put air in it and create bubbles. And that was the only relief that his son had. And that's how a jacuzzi became to be. That invention was literally created out of adversity. And how many people own them and use them today? I mean, everyone, you know, has some knowledge of what a jacuzzi is if you say the word. And I think you're absolutely right that God sometimes uses us for trials of others. And you receiving messages on Facebook and responding and opening your heart and answering them in a way that builds confidence with their struggles is a true testament of the resilience you have faced and gone through. If you, let's say, in fact, that you weren't walking by December and maybe it was next June. I mean, I know you, and I could say that going through that situation for that long, you would have really started to sink in and feel depressed and had some really mental issues, I think, with that, because it wouldn't have allowed you to be the mom you want to be and be as active as you are. And it all goes back to that day in rehab where you said, I had this sinking feeling that I'm not going to let this control me. I'm controlling this. And it's because you took ownership and decided to rehab 3 times a day. And I'll never forget, because I asked the therapist, usually I would go to therapy with Borah, and I asked her, I said, well, we've got some gym equipment downstairs and things like that. Should she, strengthen her legs or maybe do, and she kind of smirked and laughed like I was insane for even asking the question. Like, your wife just had brain surgery. What, she's going to work out with you? What's funny about that is the very next week you were down in the gym. And we were strengthening your legs, and we were riding the bike, right? So I think that a large part of that is because you decided to take ownership of that, right? So I'm so proud of you, and I know I get to say this every day because I'm married to you, but I am truly so thankful that we've walked through this together, and I've got to be your support system and watch you progress through this situation. It's been truly amazing to see and to know and just be a part of it. If, let's say, someone did get a diagnosis today, or they just got an eviction notice on their cafe because you're in that world, you're in the restaurant business, what would be maybe 1 or 2 things of encouragement that you would tell them?
Let yourself feel it. It's okay to feel it, to feel down, and to experience those negative emotions, fear and sadness and depression. And I suffer from anxiety every day. It's okay to feel it. Let yourself feel it for a little while, and then let it fuel you. Let it push you to do what you're being told you can't do. That would be the number 1. We're human. Feel it. Let yourself feel it, but then let it fuel you. And number 2 would probably be adversity doesn't define us. Don't let it define you. Let it push you to the things that someone is telling you that you can't do. Or maybe it's yourself. Maybe you're saying, I can't do this today. I can't face my team and tell them that I have an eviction notice. Or I can't face the doctors and go through with this surgery or this treatment. Don't let it define you. Let it push you. And I really believe letting myself feel that sinking feeling like they're taking this away from me, and then realizing that's not what I want, and then this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to push myself further than I ever thought I could push myself. There were moments when I was like, I'm not going to be able to do that. The day they took my walker away and gave me the walking stick, you have that on video, and it was pretty difficult, and I could have stayed on the walker. I could have said, no, I'm not ready, even though I knew I wasn't ready, but I pushed myself, and I'm so thankful because I was on the cane for less than a week, and then I was able to walk myself. So it's really, you have it inside of you. You just have to figure out how to bring it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. You have to be in the moment, and you have to feel exactly what your body's telling you. You've got to take that emotion and use it as fuel to, as you mentioned, to overcome that adversity. Eric, any final thoughts, questions, anything you want to add, contribute to just Borah's phenomenal story? I agree that this is only the beginning.
Yeah.
This is only the start of the impact you're going to make. Ohio Wexner Center's reached out. They want to do a recovery story on her to encourage other people going through this process or any medical situation to feel encouraged. The Acoustic Neuroma organization has reached out. Wow. They want to use her story. And I think that's truly the start of this being your testimony of encouraging others that they can get through adversities as well with perseverance and resilience.
Yeah. I just, again, sitting back, I've been so blessed by listening to your story. And Borah, what struck me from this episode was the fact that as people of faith, we know that the enemy is bound and determined to steal, kill, and destroy, right? We know that as people of faith. And one thing he tries to steal is our joy. And a lot of people think that joy is just something that comes to us, right? And it's something that we experience. Well, we do. If we're walking through a park and we see a puppy playing and we get to bend down and pet that puppy, it's joyful, and we've experienced some instant joy because of something we adore or something that we like. But we also have to fight for our joy, right? For you, the joy that you find in being a mother, being a wife, being a business owner, that could have been stolen from you, right? That could have been stolen from you if you had to wait 10 months, 12 months to walk again normally. And you could have waited that long if you hadn't fought for it, right? You fought tooth and nail through every inch of rehab from that decision that you made out by the car, right? When you and Johnny got in the car after that first set of rehab, you made that decision to fight for your own joy. And I think as Christians, sometimes we don't think that we have to fight for joy. And this is just a great reminder of it's not going to be handed to us on a silver platter every time. You know, we'll experience those moments, but it's our job to fight for our own joy as well. So thank you for being that example. Thank you again so much for being on this episode. And I look forward to seeing the rest of your story. And I know that the updates will come from the speaking engagements that you're going to get from this and the stories that you're going to be able to tell. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you all for listening to the Elements of Success podcast. If you haven't subscribed, please, there's a subscribe now button below. That way, if we produce a new podcast, you'll get the update directly to your listening device. So feel free to hit that button. And every time we have a new guest on or a new podcast, I'm sure this isn't going to be the only time that Borah is a guest on this show. We do have 4 boys. They're all crazy. So maybe we'll talk about that. That's a whole nother battle of resilience that we'll have.
Determination.
And perseverance, just raising those little suckers. So I think in the end, we're better for it, and hopefully they will be too. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. And this is Johnny Dawson, thanking you for being a part of the Elements of Success. And just know that we are in this together, and you don't have to go it alone. Mm-hmm. We'll talk to you again here soon.
Thank you for listening to the Elements of Success podcast. If you have not subscribed to the podcast, please click the subscribe button below. If you know anyone who would benefit from listening to this podcast, click the share button.